Welcome to the Kickstand Effect. I'm your host, Travis Garland, founder of Kickstand AI and My Compliance Citadel, where we ask the tough questions. Today, as artificial intelligence accelerates at a breakneck speed, how do we ensure our compliance, governance, and core humanity keep pace? So, in today's episode, I'm joined by the incredible Dr. Kelly So. She's a storied statistician, strategic advisor, cloud ambassador, and patient advocate for a wide ranging conversation on the real world intersection of AI, enterprise trust, and human data protection. In this episode, we dive into what it really takes to safeguard human data from drifting rogue AI agents while navigating the rapidly shifting landscape of corporate governance and risk. We break down the full picture into three high impact takeaways. First, why the executive chase for AI ROI always comes down to the impossible triangle of quality, speed, and cost. Second, how generative AI tools and large language models are blurring the traditional lines of intellectual property. And last, a deeply moving personal story from Dr. Zhou about how an unexpected AI prompt session helped spot a high risk medical lesion and literally saved her life. It's an eye opening, inspiring look at why platforms like My Compliance Citadel are so essential to keep guardrails on technology and ensure AI remains safe, purposeful, force for good. Grab your coffee, turn up the volume, and let's jump right on in to a powerful conversation with Kel. Dr. Kelso, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. And hello from New York
Excellent.
City.
Fantastic! I can almost hear the sound in the background. It sounded like a city for sure. I am joining you from Orlando, Florida, so it's a sunshine place down here. Um, I will say that you are a storied and individual that I would say has so much background, so many places that we can go in this conversation that we're going to work hard just to narrow it down. Historian, painter, I won't say politician, but I'll say advisor and strategist for the stars and for the politicians, scientist, mathematician. I've got a lot of things I can walk into for this conversation, Cal. So thank you for joining. I often start with a bit of a rapid fire set of questions. So I'm going to throw maybe 10 questions or so at you, and then we'll hop right into the podcast. So here's the first one for you. You ready for me?
Yeah, looking
All
forward
right.
to
Morning bird, night owl, or completely unpredictable? What's your sleep
definitely
pattern
nine
like?
hour because I just wrote an article on LinkedIn. Every time I go, people ask me three questions. Have you ever sleep? And second one,
Mhm.
where are you this week? And third one, what are you working on? So essentially,
Ah,
I'm a night owl, and I my mind is clear when it starts around midnight.
I like it. Well, we've already hit two of those questions, so we'll get into what you're working on, I'm sure, as we go. Second question for you. The ultimate fix for a rogue AI agent, is it a security patch or do you just unplug the thing?
Well, AI means different things to everybody. So if we think about, the current AI in terms of agentic AI, AI infrastructure, I would say
Mhm.
the security is ultimate, very important, to all the customers as well as enterprises. So I think build this from scratch in terms of something that's right versus trying to fix it continuously. Of course, AI advances so much, so there are always room for changes, but at the same time, we
Mm,
design ahead of time.
true, true. Here's one that speaks a little bit to your background. Writing a 100-page screenplay or painting for Art Basel, which requires more focus?
I would say definitely the first one because
Mm,
I was a TV producer, director when I was 15 years old. So I wrote several, I would say as a playwright,
mhm.
several different shows put on stage. I wrote TV, plays. But unfortunately, this was my very first time attempting to write a full movie screenplay recently. And this was by invitation only, and it actually took me a year and a half to constantly think about the plot and to refine the plot. Well, in terms of
Okay.
making paintings, my style is, French Impressionist painting. So kind of like Van Gogh,
Yeah.
Renoir, Monet type. So when I do it, usually I have to harness the daylight because when you're at night as a night owl, your perception
Mhm.
changes. And maybe it's good as a writer, but definitely not good as a artist, a painter. So you
Okay.
need full spectrum light, but typically I just harness the daytime light, and then that takes about 8 hours to finish from beginning to the end.
Okay. Well, I'm going to go off the script here because this is not one of my questions. But you mentioned French Impressionist painting. Let me slide into something that I haven't heard you say anything about yet: French cuisine. Are you a chef as well? Can I check that box?
No, definitely not.
No. Oh,
Uh,
all right. All right. We
no,
found one thing, maybe.
the reason is since my dad was such an outstanding chef, I'm pretty much in the shadow. And I told all my friends
Okay.
every time they invite me to have dinners, and I'm always the conversationalist and sitting there and say, "Can I help? Can I help?" They're like, "No, no." But we had very good conversations. But definitely, I'm not a chef. I know,
Okay.
everybody sees me growing up in cafeterias.
Fair. What is the single biggest buzzword in AI right now that you wish would completely disappear?
I think I would say worry, because
Hmm.
I would say, let me just, on the contrary, thinking about the word that we wanted to stay, actually, that word is trust. And people really have some questions, and sometimes it's the knowledge. The audience might would like to know that I'm one of the ambassadors for Anthropic Claude in New York City. And I would say essentially the worry is about, well, first of all, worry about hallucinations. Second one,
Mhm.
worry about taking over jobs. Third one is worry about, is it going to replace even my parents doing laundry? All kinds. AI is so broad. So I would
Mhm.
say the word I would like to think about is AI is here to stay. Instead of worrying about another industrial revolution, we will really need to think about how we can work with it and then really invent to have something AI for good, which is the essence of my company, AI for Purpose.
I'm gonna trim a couple of these out. So I'm gonna just give you maybe two more of these rapid ones. Uh, in one sentence, what do enterprise executives actually mean when they say AI ROI?
Yeah, so we had a discussion as a very good roundtable at Reuters AI conference in New York City. So I was leading that discussion exactly about AI ROIs. So I think, my one of my colleagues told me before, someone very experienced, he said that there is the impossible triangle. So I always use this analogy when I think about ROIs. The
Okay.
impossible triangles mean quality, speed, and cost.
Hmm.
So a lot of times we want, all of them, but sometimes you have to sacrifice at least one of them. So I think quality is a given for enterprise, right? We really need high quality, um, customer services. We need high quality products. We need high quality processes. However,
Hmm.
it's a balancing act between how much you're willing to pay. For example, infrastructure, as well as some of the actual tools, as well as the speed. You want to have efficiency, but at the same time, you need to pay for that efficiency. So when you think about ROIs in a company, any kind of innovation, data science, solutions, you need to think about which one you're willing to forego, which one you want to optimize. So I think typically, in the past, we were thinking about saving the cost, right? Now we're thinking about how do we up the productivity? How do we think about
Hmm.
improving the efficiency? But it's still a balancing act, how much you're willing to pay versus how much you're willing to tolerate.
Okay. Well, I think I'm gonna hit that topic right after my last question for you, my last rapid fire question for you. We hit on this one already, but I'm really kind of curious about your answer on this one. If you had to say what your favorite place was to take a 20-minute nap, where would you choose to take your nap?
Well, you asked me the good question because, in fact, I'm an inventor and solution provider for a sleeping solution using
Hmm.
digital health. So that includes not only app but also haptics as well as voice. So I would say in a place where this is really impacting everybody. Many people don't have the luxury to be in a quiet place like where I am right now. So I
Hmm.
think how can you really stay asleep, fall asleep, when you're in a noisy place like even Times Square? So I would say first one I'm thinking of is inner peace, tranquility, to really think about, you can meditate, you can think about, really fond memories, happy thoughts. However, for example, sometimes it's biological, hormonal, so temperature wise, ambience, so many factors. So I would say for me, it's a really kind of a soft place where I can feel, I'm floating in space. Maybe it's a bit of anti-gravity kind of outer space, but I think if I answer your question on the planet, I would say a place that probably is very soothing next to the ocean.
I like it. I'm experiencing the fact that each time I ask a question for most guests, I kind of know where it's going to lead. For you, I think you've hit me 50-50 on whether or not I think I could guess where you're going, Dr. So. So I will say, let's jump in. I've got some questions for you that I think will lead us a little
Yes,
more deeply into your history, into your personal life, something that you've spoken about a couple times with me and no doubt in some other places. Before we get into that, there's a couple things that I feel like are particularly relevant on a much broader scale. One of those is you've got such a deep background in statistics, no doubt probability, data mining, and those kinds of sciences. So when I think about all of the noise that happens in that space, the same thing happens in AI. So in a very broad, sweeping swath here, when you speak with executives, what's your first recommendation on how you really understand the strategic signals that are coming out of AI and how to really keep that focus in a business as opposed to all of the background noise that comes because of tech debt and just AI slop and just all sorts of stuff that's coming out of the system? How do you navigate and balance those two things? Maybe not balance, maybe just how do you find the vital few out of the trivial many in that space?
yeah, first of all, my area background came from image analysis in the medical applications. So when you think about image analysis, very interestingly, for me, I think about tumor. I think about sort of lesions. I think about some other anatomical features that you want to analyze. So in that,
Mhm.
there's this metaphor, which is we typically think about what is the foreground, what is the background, so what is the signal to noise ratio. So you just gave me that vision. So I think
Mhm.
in terms of AI, the way I communicate, basically, first of all, it depends on the audience, because AI
Okay.
means so much, broad spectrum, all kinds. So in the scientific field, you mentioned about my data science background. So I think for that, typically I'm thinking of AI in terms of machine learning, deep learning, and algorithms, equations, black boxes. So that's the one side that when you communicate with scientists, you can just dive into algorithms and dive into, even prompts, right? So in the generative AI space. Now, when you talk about, you mentioned about policy maker, policy analyst. So in that space, I'm more thinking about this framework. For example, the European health data space, the framework about data quality is a really continuous improvement cycle. You start from data, you think about the system, then you go through that system, you think about the sort of data storage, how do you do the refinement, and then you go back still to improve the data collection scheme. So I would say this is like a process driven sort of exercise. And then when
Mhm.
you think about average people on the street, I would say, since I'm a amateur artist, I wouldn't say a professional artist, I would think about AI in terms of really something can bring joy. For example, you can write a poem. One of my friends told me when her dog passed away, that was when GPT just came out. She actually said that she wrote a poem, just as the eulogy for the dog. It was so touching. And then also you think about that could generate some, images. What's interesting that I went to Rockefeller Center, so they were having a summer sort of beach scene, but in fact, all the sculptures were metal. So when you touch those balloons, they look like balloons, but they were actually metal. So not exactly the same as what's the I would say the vision would tell you. The substance is different. That's the caution. What you see may not be what you get. So that was when I decided. I
Hmm.
looked at this picture, I took a picture, I put on LinkedIn. And then the second one is I use prompts to describe the picture and try to reproduce exactly the same picture. What's interesting is that I could say that the famous sculpture, at the Rockefeller Center, somehow one of the images give me Aladdin's lantern, so oil lamp. So I would say that's quite interesting. Somehow
Ah.
it just didn't get it exactly right. So artistically,
Mhm.
AI is still not as accurate as humans sometimes.
Yeah, this is for sure. And I think some of this sort of excitement around the AI, it can be used for so many different things. And one thing that I've always heard is that AI creates efficiencies and it should reduce some costs. And there's workforce questions that are tucked into those types of statements. What also comes out of that is the movement that we have, certainly from I'm curious about it to I'm using it to creating some efficiencies. And what is certainly on the table now in most boardrooms I can only imagine, or with CFOs, is this conversation around ROI. And I don't know if I could throw a rock very far without hitting some topic around how do you actually generate ROI with AI. And I'm kind of curious if there's a space in your mind where as we really start to look forward, it is talking about ROI the next just natural iteration of all the money being spent on AI, or is AI really the going to result in ROI? Maybe if I reverse that statement and say ROI is going to be the end result of all of the work that we've done in AI. And I just don't know if ROI is the end result or if it's just the next part of the conversation. What's your take on this whole AI ROI thing?
Yeah, first of all, that's not my entire thought in terms of my, view on ROI. So
Hmm.
first of all, when you think about, let's say, organizations, there are generally two types of organizations: organizations that generate impact, that can really, change the world. And I would say sometimes the intent of that, organization. And then the second one is organization that can generate value. I don't want to say just money, but really can bring wealth in terms of, having those products and really enrichment of some groups of people. And then sometimes it's based on really the value generation. So I think the purposes are so different that in terms of thinking about ROIs could be, as I said, impossible triangle. But in terms of monetary value, in terms of shareholders, and if they go public, that's one kind of value which can be visible, real time. The other one is that going towards that goal, innovation, it's at the beginning may not be just solely based on generating the value, because some of the established companies, the return is so great. So it's nothing, right or wrong that you can just directly invest in their infrastructure as a shareholder. But why would you be, thinking about as the inventor? Why would you thinking about developing something new? I would say this is really the essence of being American and the American dream, because we want to create something that can be so, unique, and then really kind of can be broadly adopted. So I would say also solutions are not just say for one person, but really for en masse, in terms of a lot of people. So the second thought is that, in terms of generating that value as well as impact, but sometimes you have to choose one, which one you're maximizing depending on the purpose. I would also say that, it's also important to think about ROI in terms of the complexities of ownership. So this is very much debated lately. So the first thing is that people were thinking in the past in enterprise wide, there's a lot of compliance, requirement. So there's like firewalls even within the same company. I'll give you an example, because I was in fintech as investment banker also. And that was when you have research versus trading. You want to make sure that your research is unbiased. And then in the, say, pharmaceutical industry, then you also have, evidence generation for the purpose of commercialization versus purpose of research. And you want to be truthful when you publish an article, good or bad. You need to be really forthcoming, trustworthy, and transparent. So that is when you realize that with agentic AI, the ownership is blurred because you're sitting on top of this entire enterprise, almost like on the rooftop, having the 360 view, like in New York City. And then you realize that sometimes you need to set the boundaries between one building to another building. That's when you realize I cannot see that building, and I become this is like a blind spot. In the AI, the input is so important. You really want to see that 360 view, and the ownership is blurred, and ownership is complex with respect to compliance requirements.
Wow. So I really wanted to jump on this value piece because I led in with a comment referencing a CFO with ROI, and you really took us into a place of the ROI isn't necessarily about the financial space entirely. And the reality of this is we could most certainly get into some of those ESG kinds of topics and talk a little bit about some of the real estate impacts and what's it look like on sustainability. Data centers are a hot topic that, of course, we've been discussing. Might be even harder than ROI at this point. But you've made some fantastic points around where these data centers may be. I happen to sit in Central Florida, pretty rural space of Florida, not obviously Orlando Central, but certainly the state in total. The idea that these may be in the bottoms of oceans or in the deepest areas of space is a curious thing. And I don't want to jump over this question because I'm really kind of curious around when we think about the space of data and AI. I'm going to sort of pull you into that the value that you were giving me instead of the hard science of the CFO. I'm going to pull you in a little bit into what's the philosophical or the ethical space here associated with data centers and with AI as we go forward. Before I jump back into some other topics, help me walk into that softer space, if you will, around the humanity of AI.
Well, first of all, it's really interesting that I am really sort of space fanatic. So I actually love exploring the space. I always looked at the stars, constellations, galaxies. When I was a high school student, I grew up in Shanghai. That's my hometown. I won the national astronomy contest. So ever since then, I always dreamed of being an astronaut. So space is like my ultimate fantasy whenever I look, into the sky at night. So sometimes when I look into the space, I'm thinking, well, we might think that it's a vast amount of void and then we can harness this space. That was when there was a lot of interest in even exploring the metaverse, right? So that was another
Mm-hmm.
dimension. So what's interesting is that I think, for example, a few decades ago, big pharma, when they were choosing, their facilities, they were choosing exactly the same philosophy. Somewhere probably kind of not so expensive in terms of real estate, still access to talent, and then you can still get there, and then but that's kind of in a fairly remote area. But then later, a lot of the companies have chosen Boston, for example. This is an innovation hub in terms of medical research. So what's
Mm-hmm.
interesting is that it's very fast growing in terms of the concept of data center in space. But I think we need to think about really having the second copy of the data just in case, because data are valuable, themselves. And we
Mm-hmm.
always say data is the new oil, but later data is the new soil. So the second thing, there is the in terms of deep ocean, but we also know the situation of going to the ocean if the pressure is very high. So you really need to safeguard the asset. So these are really great challenges. And then that's the third option, which is on the planet, where you
Mm-hmm.
build those data centers. And then multiple countries are all very interested. For example, ranging from outside the US, Canada, Gulf region, other places. So I would say, one, we need to watch out the progression of new inventions because there was the zip file that data could be compressed and how small we could actually compress and decompress that data. The
Mm-hmm.
second one is how safe we can safeguard the data because as you know in the US we have HIPAA in European Union, we have GDPR. How much space is considered as the country border? That's another question. The final piece is that we see data as they are now, and typically a lot of the majority of data is unstructured, voice, images, so genomics that could carry really the signature in terms of personal privacy. So for that data, it's not just say a matrix of numbers.
Hmm.
So how will we really safeguard this kind of asset? It's almost like a treasure chest. How can you safeguard it in a deep, cave versus elsewhere that you can access and really have the bank vault? I think that's the analogy.
Yeah. Well, I will say that I have some thoughts around some of that protection piece, but I'm gonna use that as a bit of a launching pad of the governance question that I have for you.
Mhm.
You are a cloud ambassador in New York. You had mentioned that already. I know you also have a recent role as being appointed to the US government to help advise HHS. And in that role, there are so many areas tied to healthcare and how it is that we look at the privacy. You were just mentioning that privacy space, the unstructured data. And as I sit here in the healthcare AI space myself one of the founders of My Compliance Citadel, compliance and governance is a huge thing for us. And we often describe ourselves as protecting human data from badly behaving agents. And it's because agents can drift. They can do different kinds of things. And you've got to protect data in all sorts of ways that sometimes are creative. And as you in your new role, as you sit down with the leaders of HHS and our federal government and state, municipalities as well, where do you even start on the topic of compliance and protecting human data to the extent that you can offer the words of wisdom? What comes from that new seat that you're sitting in now?
So first of all, it's called expert in residence for the APA age. So APA is one of the organizations under HHS. So it's not under FDA, but in terms of what it does is really all the really critical innovation. So if you look at the website of APA-H, you can take a close look at the content that not only it funds innovative research, but it also builds programs. In terms of my approach to some of these, I would say first of all be proactive in terms of the kind of questions that require my input, but also I have to protect the proprietary nature of my past work and then also
Mhm.
some other work. I also want to mention that I am a mentor in a incubator in New York City, which is called C10, and it's backed by the New York City, Economic Development Corporation. So I do get a chance to see from different spectrums how founders are working on innovation, how biotech companies are working on new solution products, as well as
Mhm.
how device companies are developing new digital tools, and then how big pharma companies are looking at harnessing data and AI tools. So October, I will also chair. It's called Impact Real World Evidence Conference. I've been a chair for several times. So this is a conference where pharma leaders will come together thinking about real world data, real world evidence. And I would say this all come together, but I have to compartmentalize everything because I don't want to get into sort of, I myself have this knowledge of wisdom, which I can provide advice, but I still have to separate so that whatever the blueprint, the logic, the way that the solutions are being developed, I stay there. But of course, I am a person where I do absorb information from a lot of these sources that will shape some of my views.
Yeah, it's a fascinating space when I think about where agents are going. That separation, the intellectual property. I don't know how many conversations I've had with business partners who have said we have to make sure we're protecting this and protecting that, and this is how we should plan on doing it. The amount of data that is being absorbed through prompts and other methods within the AI, large language models, and others those kinds of things feel like they're just kind of soaking up all of our intellectual property. And there's a sense of where does it go and how do I protect it and how do I ensure that what I'm putting out there that I'm creating in my own mind that I'm asking for somebody to help build me this AI model is protected in some way. So when it walk me through what that might look like as far as I'm creating something. I'm a healthcare executive and I've got a new program that I'm going to do some care management with, or I've got a new pharmaceutical research line I want to embark upon. That sounds pretty proprietary, but how do you protect yourself when you're wanting to use the best models? And you could talk from Claude perspective if you want, or you can talk from wherever you want to go. But where do you see that protection happening so that we don't lose our own IP?
Yeah. So first of all, for enterprise, this depends on enterprise or personal, right? If you are
Mm-hmm.
employee of a company, you really have to check the policy in terms of the particular large language model that the company has contract with. And then in addition, you need to check whether it's protected in a sandbox environment so that
Mm-hmm.
there is this saying, bleeding. You don't bleed the proprietary sort of information turning into, training data in a large pool. And this is particularly important nowadays. A lot of people are using vibe coding, so they can have the idea and then they can use the minimally viable product demonstration quite easily. And then in order to file a patent, you could still use some of the automatic way to help you code as long as you know the process, the strategy, how to do it. So that becomes so competitive. And then also very innovative even for high school students. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that, interestingly, I actually, for different purposes, different audiences, I do have a few different phones. For example, I created, not only the for good company, but I also have company that provide consultations. So I separate them. And then I also have some company that creates, in terms of fashion, animation. So what I do is that, interestingly, I notice, for example, whenever I'm in a Microsoft environment, let's say have a computer, very easily, there's a Chinese saying, when you get to the water as close as possible, you get the moon because it's just like in the water. So there's this
Yeah.
metaphor in the Chinese culture. And the second one is that when I use Microsoft, then I use Copilot, and that's very easy. Just immediately you can access that. But then
Mm-hmm.
what's interesting, whenever I'm using WhatsApp, I'm using Meta AI. Then I also have all these different, apps. So I end up, depending on which phone I'm carrying, I end up being a sort of practitioner of different large language models. So out of interest, I didn't do side by side comparison, but I know how I ask questions through prompts. So the way I ask questions, it's very interesting. I was having a conversation with some professor recently. I said, it take me on a wild ride, maybe sometimes goose chase. It takes
Mm-hmm.
me to certain answers I hadn't thought of. I thought, wow, that's interesting. I didn't think of. I learned so much. So it's like a really nice counselor. At the same time, I always exhaust until there's no more question from the LLM. It's like, yes, that's the end.
I
So
didn't
what's
realize that happened, that it would actually get to an end of something.
sometimes complex scenarios, and you can ask all these questions. That's it. That's the advice. I got to several
That's all I
steps
got.
like that. And a while ago, there was this saying, they stop at certain, step and saying, you're going around the, circle and you're asking the same question. But I actually let the questions lead me. So I provide a little bit, but I usually don't put my name, or I'm using a hypothetical person because, I'm quite imaginative as a creative writer.
Mm.
So what's interesting is that every LLM is taking me to a little bit different, end and then different dimension. It's really interesting. It's almost like you're talking to six different close friends. And then in the end, they'll advise you a little bit different, but you get to know more about yourself a lot more. So I said, I still appreciate the invention like these, but at the same time, they're not the same. So really depending on exactly if you have a gold standard. One thing I also want to mention, 2017, one time I was organizing a conference as a chair. It's a professional society conference. I had to read all the abstracts and then decided to separate them into piles of different, sessions. And then
Hmm.
in terms of posters, I had to decide whether it was poster day one or day two. So it's so much manual labor intensive work. That time I happened to have a company mentorship program. So during lunchtime, I was talking to a data scientist, Jason, who was my mentee. I was telling him about this story. And he said, well, since these are all public submission, we started to do optimization and come up with similarity measures of automatically combining different abstracts into the same session and vice versa. And then we also decided if we want to let people optimize by talking more with different backgrounds as one scenario versus talking more in depth with similar scenarios, that's another one. So I end up co-founding professional societies, the I would say text analysis interest group. Now it's a section in the American Statistical Association, which is called section on text analysis. So I would say I realized the fun part, but also the efficiency part. Before this whole LLM, I would say AI revolution. So people always wonder. I am facing with so many articles to read. Lawyers always think about that. Is there any way I can query them by using a chatbot? Is there any way I could,
Hmm.
in the courtroom, I was also selected as a juror on a national murder trial. So I was like listening to these, all these storytelling by different witnesses. And there's no way I can check immediately other than through my mind the inconsistencies. I would say AI will be able to spot lies in a way, but you have to be very careful. Your algorithm is not biased to give you sort of those implicit bias, and that's why the courtroom system, federal court, they will have different representatives from different characteristics, backgrounds. And
Hmm.
I would say this is really valuable because on the street, you might see the same thing with different interpretations. And that's why the different LLMs are so valuable.
It's a question that I've posed a couple of different people, and I'm really eager to hear your thoughts on this piece. Your
Mhm.
point around the LMs contributing to a different type of output, a different kind of personality, or a different type of knowledge kind of coming out of it. The question that I'm going to ask you is tied to the culture of a company. And we know that companies, large and small, are impacted directly by the outputs of the content of these models. And I'm really sort of curious as we continue to use marketing models, a Jasper AI type LLM that's sitting out there, and they're being used to create the output of organizations, maybe smaller ones using these kinds of models to start with. And that impression, that voice that kind of comes out of it, if companies don't pay attention to what that voice looks like and it starts to get rather consistent, at what point does the culture of the large language model that it's biased toward, does that become the culture of your company? And there's an interesting sort of dynamic that I posed to a couple of different guests and said, at what point do we as an organization demand to know what models or what platform the company uses, because that informs to some extent the culture and the thinking of the actual company. And that I think is a little far down the road, but I'm really sort of I'm tipping my toe into the point of where does AI drive us as humans? Kind of circling back to some of your early statements around the culture of this space and how AI is infused in our own personal lives. You've
Mhm.
got I don't know how many phones, Doctor So. It's sort of I think you said eight maybe at one point. So I'm really sort of where at what point does this exchange become not only just my preference and the shadowness of what I use, but really starts to become the culture of a company?
Yeah, so you just reminded me of companies. Typically, they have the voice survey every year, and then this is really try to listen to their employees. And employees could be a lot of employees, but some groups
Hmm.
have few employees. So this is when you have fewer groups, smaller groups, you have variabilities. Everybody can express quite differently. There's also a cultural sort of norm. I wrote an article about leadership styles, and I said the leadership styles were dependent on the individual cultural and organizational characteristics. So you shape this really the personality of a group, right? It's group thinking.
Mhm.
But some cultures, they themselves are very sort of in harmony. And then where I came from, the Asian culture is very different. So you have a lot of group thinking and you respect the elderlies. Here, you have individualistic thinking. And then you can say somebody who came up with the ingenious idea or great solution, doesn't matter about age, doesn't matter, about what education that person is really, really driving, all really future outcome of the company.
Mhm.
So I would say that's also very different. And I would say some companies, when you think about time zone differences, other companies, you think about language differences. So I've experienced all these different sort of scenarios. And then I would say that's exactly why it makes, this kind of a melting pot very exciting. Sometimes the night owl becomes the day owl, depending on the time.
Yeah.
I would say for LLM, one thing that's important is that companies. They said I was a sort of panelist in the session at Times Square, and from the financial services industry, they said that long time ago, there were really educational sessions about how to write codes. And the second one is how to use the software to help with the codes, point and click. And then
Okay.
nobody used them. And then now when LLM came out and then with prompts, because you use verbal way of thinking, and a lot of people start to do that. So I would say, not everybody is trained as a computer scientist or software coder. So that is the appealing part of LLM. It's very intuitive. We learn how to think, and not everybody is a writer, but you can still ask questions. If you like to ask questions, that's the curiosity that will help you with some solutions. Because a lot of times you ask questions in some environment, say group thinking environment, you are so
Mhm.
self-conscious to even ask questions, raise your hand. Because, should I ask the question? Is this like a question that it makes me feel, not so smart? Those are kind of self-conscious sort of area. But here you can do a lot better ideation, exploration, and also you don't feel that kind of being judged, by LLM. LLM is quite sort of supportive in a way, and also
Sure.
addictive. That's the other side. Now, I think the thing is that you need to make sure that this not does not bleed into a larger unprotected LLM. So you need to think
Mhm.
about protection of your, employees' sort of group thinking thoughts, proprietary information. At the same time, you also need to think about, how you can shape up your action. It's actually called actionable insights. You gain insights if you don't do anything about it. You realize that the leader's sort of direction goals depart from the direction and goals of the employees. You every year you have to really align them closely, right, to go on the same journey. That's important. The other thing is you need to think about those kind of insights could guide you thinking about strategies and what others are thinking. But you also need to know the caveats, meaning sometimes this is really kind of limited view, may not be representative, may not be fully what the customers are thinking of because the company characteristics background could be different. And sorry, the last part is you really need to think, how I could use that information to help my ultimate customers to
Mhm.
generate value, not just say helping my, employees, but don't forget to think about your employees because they're the ones that also help you generate values. So I would say this LLM can give leaders some tool to really understand the temperature better, but at the same time, you need to think about potential limitations, biases, and then also make sure about hallucinations, human in the loop, and all these transparencies, trustworthiness. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it touches most certainly on the state of compliance and governance. I think the biasy space is most certainly in there. I'm hearing you talk a little bit more about what kind of work is coming out of it and what you're putting into it. The idea that we as leaders have to have a specific kind of tone and understanding of what that output is. And I know that as you and I have spoken a couple of times now, leading up to this podcast, a couple years back was a pretty profound time for you, and a personally very impactful time. And I'm curious, as you think of where that moment or that time has really led you into how it is that you view your leadership perspective and your mentoring of younger leaders who are coming up. You do so many things, Dr. So I'm you've got to tell me, one, I know a little bit more about the sleep. We've talked a little bit about where you're going, but what I'm asking now is, how do you manage the leadership profile that you have and the shadow that you create to help the next generation really prosper?
Yeah, thank you for that question. First of all, from my last question, I just want to add one more word, which is in the context of this question. That word is called risk. Everything that
Mm.
carries a risk. So, for example, for a lot of the AI assessment, you need to think about benefit versus risk. Which one outweighs which? So, I think, you may not have 100% safe, solution, but is it going to bring value? Is it going to make the elderly's life easier? Is it going to help disabled people walk? Is it going to make children understand, and less fear about, injections, for example?
Yeah.
So a couple years ago, what you were mentioning was that I was going to judge a professional startup contest. And then I had a work conflict because I was traveling overseas. So one of the companies, I would like to mention the name. The company's name is Pons. It actually won the AARP H Tech Collaborative Contest as the first prize winner. So to congratulate them as a potential should be judge, but didn't. This was hosted by the HIT lab, HIT lab in New York City. So my co-founders and we had a good conversation with, their CTO. Essentially, I had a list of questions prepared just like you do right now. And then out of
Mhm.
nowhere, I came up with, a new question. I said, pandemic is over. What's your business model? Because they focused on cardiovascular risk assessment, early detection
Mhm.
of risks. And they said that, they could have early detection of cancer. So that reminded me, that was like late afternoon like this. And
Okay.
I thought following day, I really should do something about that because I fell off the, checkup sort of wagon. And then
Uh-huh.
I called the hospital and turned out that they said that they had a spot right after that afternoon. I was very lucky. On Wednesday, when I got a text message to check, I thought nothing of it. I thought that's going to be nothing. But when I checked, it gave me a particular shape of a lesion. As statistician, I think luckily at that moment, I think I was checking LLM. Thanks, LLM. So I actually checked and it says the probability malignancy would be 90%. So pretty
Mm.
much no chance. I was like, that time I pretty much freaked out. I started read so much literature that day. And then I was telling a few sort of medical colleague in the organization. And then one colleague told me, this is not the time to do literature search. So that was helpful. Sometimes you need to have faith what it meant.
Yeah.
And then that Friday, I was offered to have a follow-up check, another a round of imaging. Found out that I actually had 95% malignancy. So I don't want to go into the HIPAA and electronic medical record details, but I immediately was able to get the best care at the best hospital. And then, sorry about that. And also, really, they let me sort of immediately had the biopsy. They immediately gave me the best care pathway. So I want to shout out. This was like Memorial Sloan Catering. It was so wonderful. And
Mm.
then my primary care hospital, so that was Langong at NYU, was also really, really proactive, helpful. So I was so lucky that immediately I got the resection. 2 years later, everything has been still clear, nothing. And also every Saturday, I help coach sports and recreational sports to disabled people at the local university. It's actually called Project Happy. I After 2 weeks since my surgery that time, I asked my surgeon I was allowed to go back and teach sports. My mom was an elite athlete and captain of the basketball team of medical school. So I basically that moment just felt like I got the second life, and I still feel that way. And if anything I could help in terms of advancing innovations to save patients like me, I was kind of was never really a data point. I analyzed data, but then I realized I became a data point. That was when I realized I actually volunteered to be part of a biobank study. And then my story got so many people sort of liking my story, making really heartfelt sort of comments. And the NIH officer read my story, and then she reached out to me. So I was invited to be AI expert as a patient advocate at the NIH panel last fall. And then when I show up, it was really surprising that my primary care physician happened to be sitting next to me on the same panel.
Oh, wow. What,
Yeah.
did they know that at the time when they invited you?
Because we had a little bit kind of a separate preparation sessions, so was totally surprised. But they
Oh,
said
wow.
you can't even plan for something like that. It was like really great reunion. And soon after that, I actually had my annual checkup. I never fall off annual checkup again.
Excellent. Well, um, lots of places to go to from here, but it's a happy moment to end on for sure. What I'd like to do, maybe I'll just give you the microphone if you want to tell us a little bit more about AI for Purpose advisory, excuse me, and let us know what you're up to. I can only imagine that list is probably long, but whatever it is that you'd like to end us with, happy to hear you out.
Yeah, so thank you, Travis. I really want to emphasize two different companies that could bring one is really important impact. The second one is generate value. So that was what I was talking about. They're
Hmm.
fully independent, so we wouldn't get into sort of trying to muddle the intent issue. In terms of AI for purpose, which four is number four, we have four pillars. The first one is to enable innovation. And we are having AI workshop New York City upcoming. That's going to be held later this month in July. And there are lots of demos as well as presentations, panels, as well as student hackathon and trivia. So
Hmm.
that's the first thing. This is also repeating conference, not the first one. So we started that in collaboration with the American Statistical Association's New York City chapter, and I'm president of the New York City chapter right now. So that's the first thing. The second pillar is to help in terms of illuminate. Illuminate means that we really want to talk about these issues. And the more you talk about these issues, the more you are thoughtful about solutions. So this is really community building in terms of networking, in terms of sharing across different sectors. You can still protect your own proprietary information. The third one is really connecting people. So connecting people means that there are some people that are left behind due to AI. So for example, people who are potential boomerang hires, people who are students who graduate and may not find an internship, or these are the people you really want to connect, not just with the talents, but people who might really potentially being disadvantaged in this AI era, have the education. That's part of the reason we want to have these workshops, tutorials. The last part is mentorship. And then that we have multiple summer interns, and then who are helping with our sleep study, as well as we have a new book, with in terms of 2 volumes. And then those are chapters about AI for healthcare. So that's that. And then AI for advisory, it's really having four different verticals. The first vertical is about really AI, algorithms, IT. The second one is about data science, statistics. Third one is value generation, evidence generation. The last part is emerging tech. It's really interesting that we are not restricted to healthcare or finance, but we are also looking at property tech. We're looking at fashion tech. We look at something called femtech. A lot of women are consumers. So it's like sky's the limit. It's kind of all kinds of technologies that are emerging, and that would need some kind of guidance and advice. And we do have the second company advisory is more having the B2B model, where the first one
Okay.
is really engaging people directly.
Fantastic. Well, Dr. Kelly, so thank you so much for your time. It's been wonderful having you on as a guest. I do feel like you're ripe for a whole series of conversations for sure, because there's lots to talk about. But thank you for laying out the next couple months and certainly the mission for your organization. And certainly, I know you've got several pieces of those organizations. I'm excited to see where you guys go, and I'm excited to hear your voice again. So, thank you for joining as a guest. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks, Travis. I'm happy to come back again.
All right.
All right, thank you.